Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I'll be honest with you guys, I have not really been reading the Savage Avengers, and I know a lot of you guys have suggested it. A lot of you guys have said that, like, Savage Avengers is a really good story. I read the first arc, City of Sickles, because I usually try to give every single story that comes out, like, one single story arc to see whether or not I like it, but then I kind of dropped off after that, and a lot of you guys said it was amazing, and you're like, you need to cover Savage Avengers, or at least read more of it, and so we're gonna cover the King in Black tie-in for Savage Avengers. Here's the funny thing about this, though. In this story, Iceman becomes God. Like, he becomes a god. Like, it's kind of nuts, right? Just like reaching this insane level of power. And it really looks like he's like this one-man army, right? It's just kind of nuts, right? We'll talk about that once we get to it. The funny thing about this is that what you end up having here is Conan the Barbarian, who's basically thrown in jail. For those of you guys who don't know, the Savage Avengers largely focuses on Conan the Barbarian with a few other people. The roster's kind of shifting around a little bit, so I wouldn't say it's a rotating ensemble cast, but at the moment it kind of is, right? But he's basically thrown in jail because he apparently attacked a police dog. But the funny thing about this is that, you know, him being thrown in jail also lands him in jail with Deadpool, because Deadpool's already there. And as most of you guys know, not the biggest Deadpool fan in the world, Deadpool in this story is amazing. He's hilarious in Savage Avengers. But the funny thing about this is that Deadpool, he initially goes to steal the keys from a cop, which he's successful in doing. Ultimately, he ends up stealing his personal keys instead of the keys to basically unlock the cell. His hand is like smashed, and then when it heals, Conan realizes, oh my god, this guy has a healing factor. And so he's like, your hand heals just like Logan's does. And he's like, Logan, yeah, I know him. Like, I know that guy, right? I only ever hear of him when he needs like some sales or something like that, right? Like when he needs his comics to sell, he comes and talks to me. But nonetheless, he's like, okay, Logan is the guy that I want to talk to, right? Like, I need to speak to Logan again, right? Because Logan and Conan have met previously and kind of teamed up, but not really in the past. But it's one of these things where he's kind of like, okay, so you heal. What I want to do is, like, I want to get basically like the claws that Logan has, right? Like those retractable blades. And he's like, snicked. So it's kind of funny to see Conan talking in his old language, being excited about like getting something that's equivalent to Wolverine. And so he's like, okay, so I have a plan to get us out of here. And Deadpool's like, all right, well, what's your plan? And he's like, you heal, right? And he's like, yeah. He's like, cool, that's what I need, because we need you to get the keys from the guard, and the guard's outside the cell. So we need to get you outside the cell. So I'm gonna be as fast as I possibly can. And he basically mashes Deadpool through the bars of the prison cell and spits him out the other side. Now, here's the thing. If you're a guy who's locked up in prison and you want people to know that you're not someone to be trifled with, squeeze them through prison bars. And people will be like, okay, so this guy's obviously not to be messed with, because, you know, like literally all these guys are puking their guts up. One guy's like, oh my God, like it's... It's pretty crazy. It's kind of nuts. Now, of course, Deadpool ends up, you know, basically getting out and then goes after one of the guards and then throws the keys to Conan, and Conan basically breaks them out. Now, that's when they're met by the arrival of Nightflyer. Nightflyer has existed before. He originally appeared back in Captain America 213, where he kind of got into this little bit of a skirmish with Steve Rogers and then was ultimately killed, not really by Steve Rogers, but was basically killed in an assassination attempt gone wrong. And then ultimately he was resurrected and then faced off against the Incredible Hulk and then was killed again. The reality of having this guy here is that this is one of those times when Marvel just kind of pulls out a character and then reworks them because they can, right? Because Nightflyer is obscure enough of a name that no one's really gonna ask any questions, right? Like, nobody reading Savage Avengers right now is gonna see Nightflyer and then just be like, wait, haven't I heard of him before? I mean, I guess I did, right? But like aside from like super old school characters, nobody new is gonna ask that question. So Marvel can just kind of, you know, create a new Nightflyer and nobody's gonna be any the wiser, right? So the funny thing about this, Nightflyer is an amazing character. This guy Stanley, he's awesome, and I love the way that he's depicted here. So he's like, you know, I'm the Nightflyer, like, you had to have heard of me. He's like, I'll lead you to a like basically a place where essentially a safe house, and then we'll get to a score. And so Conan's like, okay, like, I'm leaving, but you know, if you want to tell me about like the tales of this treasure, then like I'm down with that. You know, because Conan's all about money. And here's a funny thing. Here's a funny thing here, right? So like, as they're making their way out of here, they end up going by what is basically the evidence stash, and Deadpool finds his swords, which, you know, he's been missing for a little while. And then Conan gets like a machete and a shotgun, right? And he was like, I'm leaving this jail richer than when I entered. And Nightflyer's like, that's how you know you did jail right, man. You leave better off than you were when you went in. Now, of course, all this coincides with the actual King in Black event, so you're probably wondering, like, what does any of this have to do with the King in Black? So the reality is they don't really have any intention of facing off against Knull. There's gonna be this amazing moment where things pop off. But the reality is that as they're kind of leaving, they're attacked by some of the dragons of Knull. One of them recognizes Conan and is like, do you remember me? Remember who I am? And basically snatches up Conan and then absorbs him, right? And that's what we end up learning here, that at a previous point in time during the original City of Sickles storyline, that there came a point whereby Conan, quote unquote, freed a symbiote. And so the way this kind of story is told by the symbiote itself is that millennia ago, it had crash landed on Earth, right? It had somehow arrived on this world. We're not really told as to how it happened. We're just told that it did. But ultimately, it just kind of changed hands, where it was sold, it was stolen, it was bartered for other things, until it came in the possession of a guy who was using the symbiote as a way to sell other goods, right? That he would basically say, like, this is an ancient genie. You know, if I have a genie here, imagine all the other wares and the valuables that I have in this place. Of course, this is thousands of years ago. But what ends up happening is there is a man who shows up here, this simply referred to as Mekri Ra, who's at that point in time depicted as the Sorcerer Supreme. This is one of those interesting moments where Marvel basically introduces a person who played the role of Stephen Strange before Stephen Strange. And we know even with like the Ancient One's only a few thousand years old or a few hundred years old. He's not, or at least he wasn't all that old in relation to like the history of the world and the people who existed. And that's an important distinction to understand when it comes to the Sorcerer Supreme. We know that there was like the original Sorcerer Supreme of Earth, that person of course being Agamotto. But as far as I'm aware, Marvel's never really given us a chronological history of the various Sorcerer Supremes who have existed across the history of the Marvel Universe, right across Earth. We simply kind of go with Agamotto, then you just kind of jump forward a huge number of years, and then you focus on the Ancient One, and then it goes to Stephen Strange. And there may have been intermittent stories where like they're kind of thrown in. In my defense, I'm not ultra well versed on the history of Stephen Strange and all the various Sorcerer Supremes that may or may not have been introduced over the course of his lifespan. I'm not certain that's ever really happened with Marvel. But the important thing here, you know, even leaving that out, the important thing here is that this guy was fascinated by what he thought was a genie. Now, ultimately, he realizes pretty quickly, while he doesn't know that it's an actual symbiote, that it's not really a genie in the traditional sense, right? It doesn't really perform magic, but it is a symbiote by all standards of measurement, right? It bonds itself to hosts, different things like that. And so what ends up happening is somewhere along the line, this guy is basically met by the arrival of Kulan Gath. Now, Kulan Gath is really one of the sorcerers who exists in Marvel Comics and is essentially the arch nemesis of Conan the Barbarian. It's one of these things where he's always trying to chase him down and always trying to destroy him. Ultimately, when Kulan Gath ends up getting a hold of the symbiote and kills the Sorcerer Supreme in the process, he basically subjects it to like torture and experimentation, all kinds of different things. There's one point where he actually tried to eat it in order to obtain its power. Now, a lot of this is because at the time, Kulan Gath was relatively primitive in comparison to like people as they exist now. But ultimately, what ended up happening is that where the symbiote kind of just passed from one place to the next, and then ultimately ended up in the City of Sickles, that Conan, when he had freed it, had basically done it a service. And so the idea is that because of what's going on here, that the symbiote itself harbors a vendetta against Kulan Gath and ultimately wants to help Conan kind of achieve that goal. And so it basically reforms or has bonded itself to Conan's sword, so Conan can kind of use the power of the symbiote in combination with his own weapon and then go forward from there. Now, it's kind of a cool little reference here because we know that like the first real revelation of Knull existing came by way of the all-black Necro Sword. So this is not really that. It's not the all-black Necro Sword as we know it, but it's a cool little tribute to the idea of it. And so what you end up getting here is Conan just kind of re-emerging while possessing this symbiote and then saying, like, telling all the dragons that are out there to leave. Now, most likely they did because from their perspective, it was a symbiote giving them a command, and so they ended up leaving anyway, not really because Conan did it. But then Deadpool's kind of like, okay, so like we probably need to leave here because as far as I'm aware, we're not really out of the range of the snipers. And then it's like, pow, it's a shot, and then he's like, potatoes, and then he literally got sniped in the head. And so initially they were going to leave Deadpool behind, right? Nightflyer's like, dude, leave him, man. And Conan's like, no, right? He helped us to get out. He's done his part. His fate will be the same as ours, right? So they end up basically racing off and then go to what is in effect the bar with no name. And from here, it's just kind of arranging the business venture and getting things sorted out. Not a whole lot doing there, right? Just kind of a couple things here and there. But ultimately, when they get to the location of where the heist is going to be, we find out it's the Hellfire Club. Now, the Hellfire Club, they've got hands in everything. But the important thing to understand understand, the Hellfire Club as it used to exist when it was originally created under Chris Claremont doesn't really exist that way anymore. That the Hellfire Club and all the various mutants involved are essentially an extension of Krakoa, right? So it's kind of been reworked. The original building itself is more or less abandoned, right? There really isn't anybody who operates out of there anymore. All the mutants that normally would have been here all basically, you know, delve or exist in the realm of Krakoa. But the funny thing about this is that Krakoa, despite everything going on there with the mutant population, would largely be a foolish place to keep everything. And so what they've been doing is all the black market money that Krakoa makes, that they literally just use this place as a slush fund and a safe house for all the money they have. Now, the reality is it's also kind of a dumb decision too. I mean, they've got a gate there, but it's also kind of a dumb decision because it's like, what if somebody does exactly what they're doing here, which is showing up here and then basically trying to rob the joint? And so when that happens, immediately the gate opens and like you literally have Deadpool and you've got Nightflyer and you've got Conan, who are met by the arrival of Callisto, Iceman, and Bishop. Now, the reason why you see these three guys here, and when the fight initially breaks out, things kind of pop off. It's a pretty straightforward little skirmish here, but the reason why you see these three guys here is because of the fact that, like, the rest of the X-Men, as we know, were sent to fight in New York against the forces of Knull, and they all basically were captured. Cyclops, Storm, all those guys were effectively captured there. And so what you get is this amazing moment here where Conan's been around for an exceedingly long time, and he's faced off against a multitude of different threats. And as soon as he sees Iceman, he's like, you're not a man, you're a member of the Frost Giants, right? Like, you are in effect a Frost Giant, a godly being. Now, Iceman has no idea who he's talking about when he tells him, like, you're descended from Empyre, the original Frost Giant. And ultimately it's one of these things where, like, he just attacks him and says, like, tell the Frost Giant Empyre that, like, I'll see him in hell, right? Something crazy and kind of bonkers like that. But that's an important distinction to understand here, because for the most part, the fight ends pretty quickly. And the reason why is because there's a timetable here and they've got more important things to worry about. And so there is what is in effect a kind of ceasefire, in the sense that, like, the mutants kind of get the upper hand, but it's really more of like, okay, like, cool our horses, right? Like let's cool our jets, find out what's going on. And it's really just Callisto and Bishop and Iceman saying, look, like, you know, we're leading the X-Men now because all the other ones are basically captured, you know, in the fight against Knull. So ultimately they're like, you know, we can let you guys go and we can all team up and face off against Knull, or we can just take you guys back to Krakoa, and then whatever fate resides you, or whatever fate, you know, goes on there, right? We can just kill you, whatever it is. So they kind of force their hand. And so ultimately the group more or less teams up, right? And they end up going to face off against the forces of Knull. Now, here's the cool thing that happens here. As soon as they arrive there, you immediately have Cyclops, who shows up, right? Or really just kind of appears. And when they try to talk him down, of course, the control that Knull has over Cyclops, because he's not one of the individuals who was freed by Dylan, is really just too strong. And so there's no way they can just kind of talk him down from being who he is, right? From being possessed by Knull. The other crazy thing that happens is Storm enters the fray. Now, the funny thing is that Callisto realizes Storm's there, and then she's looking at Deadpool, who has two swords, and she's like, you idiot, you're holding lightning rods, and, like, she kicks him out of the way. Deadpool gets electrocuted by Storm, so she's just like, get away from me. And so Storm shows up, but you also get this amazing moment here where Knull basically establishes that Storm's the most powerful host he has, right? He says, of all my new avatars, this one is the most powerful. Here's the thing to understand, guys. A lot of folks are sleeping on Storm. They see her as like a girl who manipulates weather. Here's the important thing to understand. While Storm has more recently been established to be an Omega level mutant under Jonathan Hickman, even before that, we all basically knew she was. I mean, there is a kind of, like, definitive statement, Storm is Omega level, when Marvel confirms it, but, like, you can oftentimes look at a mutant and just know that they basically are. You know, the designation of a character being Omega level by Marvel Comics is really more just an official status. But you just kind of have to look at what they're capable of, right? Like, look at the full gamut, the weakest points of their powers and the highest points of their powers, and then just kind of make a differentiation from there. But the cool thing about this is that you end up having Conan talking directly to Iceman here. Because of everything going down, they're like, okay, the mission's scrubbed, right? We gotta go. Like, we are in no position to take these guys on. They're way beyond us. And that's when Conan's like, look, I know you've never heard of Empyre, you don't believe you're a Frost Giant, but understand, like, you are not a man, right? I mean, sure, there's some mutant kind going on there, but you have the blood of Frost Giants in you. And the Frost Giants that I know are superly overpowered, right? These guys are insane. So literally, Iceman is just like, okay, cool, let's do this. Amps up the full totality of his power, right? Like, the full brunt of his power, just like amplifies it all, becomes like this godly level character, right? Like, when they're like, okay, Iceman, we gotta go. And Conan's like, no, man, like, like you need to fight like you're a frost giant, right? Like you've got frost giant blood in your veins, you've got the blood of gods in your veins. It's time to start acting like it. Then like literally Bishop is like, Iceman, we gotta go. And Iceman's like, nope, we're staying here. Like I'm staying here and I'm fighting this. And it's nuts, right? The way that it's described here is they say like for the first time in recorded history, New York became the coldest place on the planet. Like literally channels the full totality of his power and takes on every single one of these symbiote dragons. And it's not like there's two. I mean, there's something like 8 or 9 of these things. Now keep in mind, these dragons were a handful for even like Thor or somebody out there who was struggling to take them on. Iceman just increases his size several times over and literally just, it's crazy to see. We've never really seen Iceman do this. The only time we ever saw Iceman kind of elevate himself to this level is when Emma Frost took control of his body and then was like, oh my God, this guy's Omega level, right? Like it's Iceman at his most, really at the highest we've ever seen him. And here's the crazy thing about this, it's not even at his most extreme, but the possibility being here, and we don't know if it's actually true, right? It's just a statement by Jerry Dugan. It might be something they explore later on, but if Iceman really does have frost giant blood in his body, then Iceman really is a god. Like he really is descended from gods, which would explain why his power is so extreme, but only ever appears in small moments because he just never pushes it to that extreme. But the crazy thing is that you end up having the rest of the characters, the rest of the Savage Avengers as they exist along with the X-Men, kind of going back to the safe house while Iceman's still fighting this fight. And when that happens, it's just kind of like, okay, like we need to kind of get back out there. But ultimately Conan's like, I still want to speak with Logan, right? So Logan, of course, shows up here and meets with Conan, and it's kind of like, okay, like what did you want to talk to me about, right? Like what did you want me for? And he's like, no, I'm just here out of respect. I wanted you to know this place is now mine, right? This base for the Hellfire Club, this is now my house, right? I'm taking this place over. This is going to be my base of operations. We're going to operate out of here, right? Formerly it was controlled by your guys, but no more. And if anybody has any questions about that, then let them know what I'm capable of and let them know to expect a massive fight when they get here. And so it's like, I'm just letting you know, right? This is like, I am the new king here. So it's an interesting thing because it's really more of just kind of Jerry Dugan doing this for the purpose of just being like, here's Conan's new base of operations. But something else to understand here, Conan's going forward with the possession of a symbiote. Like Conan is going to have a symbiote as part of his weapons cache. So like, that's really going to change and elevate his power. I gotta say guys, I'm digging this Savage Avengers story, right? This is pretty solid. Like I'm definitely into this. So I think I'll probably start reading it more from here on out. But let me know what you guys think, right? Let me know how you guys feel about this. If you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.